She wore glasses, quiet librarian. No one ever questioned who she really was. But that cold look in her eyes, the precision she showed when checking library cards, a military intelligence expert would notice these things. Because this woman was not just a guardian of books, but a keeper of state secrets. Welcome to the Human Stories. Before we begin this powerful tale of hidden identity and forgotten service, tell me in the comments which city you're watching from today. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be remembered, hit that subscribe button and help us honor those who served in silence. The Central City Library stood like a fortress of knowledge on Fifth Avenue, its granite steps worn smooth by decades of footsteps. Inside, between towering shelves that reached toward vaulted ceilings, worked a woman most people never really saw. She was part of the furniture, as permanent and unremarkable as the card catalogs that had been replaced by computers 20 years ago. Margaret Chen had worked at the library for 32 years. She arrived every morning at 7:30, 30 minutes before opening, and left at exactly 5:15, 15 minutes after closing. She never called in sick, never took vacation days, never complained about the pay or the long hours spent on her feet. The younger staff members called her the quiet one when they talked about her at all, which wasn't often. She was small, maybe 5'3", with graying hair always pulled back in a practical bun. Her clothes were unremarkable: dark skirts, plain blouses, comfortable shoes that made no sound on the library's polished floors. She wore glasses with thin frames that seemed to magnify her dark eyes, eyes that took in everything but revealed nothing. Most patrons walked past her without a second glance. She was just another middle-aged librarian, the kind who shushed too loudly and remembered every overdue book. But if they had looked closer, really looked, they might have noticed things. The way she moved through the stacks with purpose, never hesitating, never searching. The way she organized returned books not just by call number, but by subject matter, creating patterns that looked almost like intelligence files. The way she watched. Margaret had developed a system over the years that went far beyond typical library organization. Books were shelved not just alphabetically, but with careful attention to who had checked them out, when they were returned, and in what condition. She noticed when the same person checked out multiple books on explosives, or when someone requested interlibrary loans for texts on surveillance techniques. She noticed patterns that others missed, connections that others couldn't see. The reference section had become her command center. When students came looking for information, she didn't just point them toward the right shelf. She guided them with subtle precision, steering them away from certain materials while making others more accessible. She knew which books contained information that could be dangerous in the wrong hands, which research topics raised red flags, which questions were innocent and which were not. Her desk was positioned with mathematical precision to provide a clear view of the main entrance, the computer terminals, and the back exit. Over the years, she had memorized the faces of regular patrons, cataloged their habits, their interests, their routines. She could identify which college students were genuinely pursuing education and which ones were asking too many questions about the wrong subjects. The library's computer system revealed everything to her trained eyes: who accessed what databases, who printed what documents, who spent hours researching topics that seemed unrelated but formed dangerous patterns when viewed together. She had administrative access to user logs, search histories, and document downloads that painted detailed pictures of what people were really looking for. But Margaret Chen wasn't just a librarian with an unusual attention to detail. She was a woman carrying secrets that would have shocked anyone who knew her quiet routine. 25 years of CIA operations had trained her to see patterns, to notice details, to protect information that could change the world. The skills never left her, even in retirement. It was a Tuesday morning in late October when her carefully maintained cover was about to be tested. The library was experiencing its typical quiet morning rhythm, populated only by early regulars and a handful of college students cramming for midterms. Margaret was processing returned books when she noticed something that made her years of training snap into focus. A young man had entered the library, and everything about him screamed military intelligence. His posture spoke of disciplined training, even when he was trying to appear casual. His hair was regulation short, his clothes carefully selected to blend in but too clean, too pressed for a typical college student. Most telling of all was the way he moved through the library, not like someone looking for books, but like someone conducting reconnaissance. Captain David Park was 3 weeks into his assignment at the Military Intelligence Academy, pursuing a graduate degree in international relations as part of his cover for advanced intelligence training. His instructors had told him to use the public library for research rather than the Academy's classified databases to maintain his civilian student identity and avoid any connections to military facilities. He had expected to find a typical public library. Helpful staff, outdated computers, and the usual mix of students and retirees. What he discovered instead was something that made his specialized training kick into high alert. He was looking at what appeared to be a perfectly organized intelligence operation. The first indicator was the layout itself. The librarian's desk commanded a view of the entire main floor, positioned like a watchtower, with clear sightlines to all entrances and exits. The book arrangement seemed random at first glance, but as he walked through the stacks, patterns began to emerge. Books on similar subjects were grouped together, but not according to standard library organization. They were arranged by sensitivity level, by the type of information they contained, by their potential use to different kinds of researchers. The computer terminals were positioned so that screens could be observed from the main desk without making the surveillance obvious. The reference section was laid out like a carefully designed maze, guiding researchers naturally towards some materials while making others difficult to find. It was subtle, professional, and completely invisible to anyone who hadn't been trained to recognize intelligence architecture. But it was the librarian herself who triggered every alert in David's professional training. She processed books with mechanical precision, but her eyes were constantly moving, scanning, cataloging. She had noticed his entrance immediately, tracked his movement through the stacks, and positioned herself to maintain visual contact without appearing to watch him. Her body language was controlled, alert, aware of her surroundings in a way that spoke of training far beyond library science. David had spent 2 years learning to recognize intelligence operatives, to spot the subtle signs that separated professionals from amateurs. This woman displayed every marker of someone with deep training in surveillance, information control, and operational security. She was running the library like a classified facility, and doing it so skillfully that no one else had noticed. He spent the morning researching his assigned topic on Cold War intelligence cooperation, but found himself studying the librarian more than his books. She handled every interaction with patrons like a security screening, asking questions that seemed helpful but were actually designed to determine intent and capability. She guided researchers towards certain materials while subtly discouraging access to others. She maintained detailed records of who accessed what information, creating a comprehensive database of research activities that would have impressed his academy instructors. When David approached the reference desk to inquire about interlibrary loans for specialized books on intelligence operations, the librarian's response confirmed his growing suspicions. She didn't just provide information, she evaluated his request, probed his background with skillful questioning, and made subtle attempts to determine why he needed access to sensitive materials. Her questioning technique was professional, sophisticated, and completely at odds with typical librarian training. The librarian's assessment was thorough and subtle. She asked about his academic program, his research focus, his intended use for the materials. Each question was designed to build a profile to determine whether he represented a security risk or legitimate research interest. Her evaluation process was identical to security clearance interviews David had experienced in his military training. What struck him most was her casual mention that certain publications would need to be used in the reference section only, with restricted circulation. This wasn't standard library policy. It was information control, the kind of access management used in classified facilities to monitor who had access to sensitive materials. David realized he was witnessing something extraordinary. This wasn't just a librarian with good organizational skills. This was a professional intelligence operative who had adapted her training to a civilian environment, using her position to monitor and control information access in a public facility. The question was whether she was still active in some capacity, or whether decades of professional habits had simply shaped her approach to civilian work. He spent the rest of the week conducting his own surveillance operation, using his training to study Margaret's methods without alerting her to his scrutiny. What he discovered was remarkable and slightly alarming. Margaret Chen had transformed the public library into a sophisticated information monitoring center, tracking research activities, identifying potential security risks, and maintaining operational security that surpassed what he had seen in some military facilities. She maintained detailed files on regular patrons, noting their research patterns, their associations, their potential security implications. She flagged unusual research requests, monitored access to sensitive materials, and maintained what appeared to be an informal network of contacts that provided her with information about activities throughout the city. Margaret's system was comprehensive and professionally implemented. She had identified patrons who requested information about infrastructure vulnerabilities, weapons technology, surveillance techniques, and other topics that could indicate hostile intent. She tracked research patterns that might seem innocent individually, but formed concerning profiles when analyzed together. The breakthrough in David's investigation came on Friday afternoon when he was returning books and noticed Margaret's computer screen reflected in the glass door of a display case. She was accessing a database he immediately recognized, a classified federal information system that required high-level security clearance to use. The system was designed for active intelligence personnel to coordinate with other agencies and access restricted information. The moment of recognition was mutual and immediate. Margaret looked up from her screen to find David watching her, and both of them understood that their careful covers had been compromised. The quiet librarian and the graduate student had identified each other as intelligence professionals operating in the same space. Margaret's reaction was telling. She closed the database with professional calm, stood up slowly, and approached David with the same measured precision she brought to all her activities. But now David could see the alertness in her posture, the readiness for whatever confrontation or conversation might follow. Without speaking, Margaret led David to a small conference room behind the reference section, a space most patrons didn't know existed. Once the door was closed, the careful facade of the helpful librarian disappeared, replaced by something much more direct and professional. What followed was a careful dance of mutual identification. Margaret revealed that she was a retired CIA operations officer with 25 years of service, primarily in Southeast Asia and Eastern Europe, specializing in counterintelligence operations. She had retired in 2003 and taken the library position as a way to use her skills in a low-pressure environment. David identified himself as an active-duty military intelligence officer currently enrolled in advanced training at the academy. His research at the library was part of his cover assignment, designed to maintain his civilian student identity while he completed specialized courses in intelligence analysis. Margaret's career history was impressive and explained everything David had observed. 25 years as a CIA operations officer meant she had been involved in some of the most sensitive intelligence operations of the Cold War and post-Cold War periods. Her expertise in counterintelligence explained her ability to create and maintain the sophisticated monitoring system she had implemented at the library. The conversation revealed that Margaret's retirement from the CIA was official, but her commitment to protecting national security had never ended. She had recognized that intelligence work doesn't really have an endpoint. Threats evolve, methods change, but the fundamental need for information security remains constant. Margaret explained how she had adapted her professional skills to her civilian environment. The library's computer system gave her access to patron records, research histories, and information requests that painted detailed pictures of what people were really seeking. She had learned to identify patterns that might indicate security risks, from individual researchers seeking information about sensitive topics to coordinated efforts by multiple people researching related subjects. Her informal network of contacts included retired colleagues from various agencies, active personnel who appreciated her unique position, and local law enforcement officials who had learned to value her insights. When she identified potential security concerns, she had established channels for passing information to appropriate authorities without compromising her cover or the library's operations. Margaret provided examples of her work that demonstrated both its value and its complexity. She had identified a patron who was systematically researching water treatment facility security, municipal power grid vulnerabilities, and emergency response protocols. Individually, these research topics might have been innocent, but together they formed a pattern suggesting someone was planning an infrastructure attack. Her response had been measured and professional. She flagged the information and passed it to her contacts in federal law enforcement. The patron was investigated and determined to be a graduate student working on a legitimate homeland security thesis, but the system had worked exactly as designed. A potential threat had been identified and evaluated before it could develop into an actual security risk. David began to understand what Margaret had accomplished. She had created an early warning system that operated completely under the radar of official oversight. She was providing a service that no one knew they needed, protecting information that most people didn't realize was sensitive, and doing it all while maintaining the appearance of a normal public library. The sophistication of Margaret's operation was impressive. She had identified the types of information that could be dangerous in the wrong hands, developed methods for tracking who was accessing what materials, and created protocols for evaluating whether research activities represented legitimate academic work or potential security threats. Her position as a librarian provided perfect cover for this work. She had legitimate reasons to ask about research topics, to track information access, and to maintain detailed records of patron activities. Her professional demeanor and helpful attitude meant that people answered her questions without suspicion, providing her with the information she needed to assess potential risks. What struck David most was that Margaret was doing this work entirely on her own initiative. She received no official support, no oversight, no recognition for her efforts. She was motivated purely by a sense of duty and a recognition that her unique skills and position allowed her to continue serving national security interests even in retirement. The partnership that developed between Margaret and David was natural and mutually beneficial. David brought current intelligence training, access to military networks, and a different perspective on threat assessment. Margaret provided decades of operational experience, an established information monitoring system, and the kind of institutional knowledge that couldn't be taught in any academy. Together, they refined and expanded the system Margaret had created. They developed more sophisticated methods for tracking research patterns, created better protocols for evaluating potential threats, and established more secure channels for communicating with federal agencies when security concerns were identified. The library continued to operate exactly as it always had, serving the public, providing access to information, and supporting education and research throughout the community. But beneath the surface, it had become something more, a monitoring station where trained professionals worked to identify and prevent potential security threats before they could develop into actual dangers. Margaret's approach represented a new model for how intelligence professionals could continue to serve even after their official careers ended. She had found a way to use her skills and training in a civilian context, providing value to national security while maintaining complete operational security and avoiding any appearance of government surveillance of public facilities. The network that grew from Margaret's work eventually included other retired intelligence professionals who had found similar ways to continue serving. Libraries, universities, research institutions, and other information-focused organizations became informal monitoring stations, staffed by people who understood how to identify and respond to potential security threats. David's experience with Margaret shaped his understanding of intelligence work and public service. He learned that the most effective operations often happen quietly, without recognition or official support. He discovered that some of the most dedicated professionals were those who continued to serve even when no one was watching, motivated by duty rather than career advancement. Margaret Chen never sought recognition for her work. She never wrote memoirs about her CIA career or gave interviews about her continued service in retirement. She simply continued to work at the library, organizing books, helping patrons, and protecting information with the same precision and dedication she had brought to her official career. Years later, long after David had completed his training and been assigned to operational duties around the world, he would remember Margaret as one of the most dedicated professionals he had ever worked with. Not because of the classified operations she had conducted or the state secrets she had protected, but because of the way she had found meaning in quiet service, continuing to protect her country even when no one was watching. The story of Margaret Chen represents something rare and valuable in public service, a professional who found a way to continue serving without fanfare, to protect without glory, to maintain the mission even when the mission had officially ended. She demonstrated that dedication doesn't require recognition, that service doesn't end with retirement, and that the most important work is often done by those who never seek credit for their efforts. In a world where intelligence work is often portrayed as glamorous and exciting, Margaret's story reminds us that real security work is usually quiet, methodical, and unglamorous. It's about paying attention to details, recognizing patterns, and making careful decisions about information access and security. It's about understanding that protecting democracy requires constant vigilance, even in places as mundane and ordinary as a public library. The glasses-wearing librarian with the quiet demeanor and the sharp eyes had spent decades protecting state secrets in some of the world's most dangerous places. In retirement, she found a way to continue that mission, ensuring that public information remained available to those who needed it, while keeping it away from those who might misuse it. Her legacy isn't measured in headlines or commendations, but in threats that were identified and prevented, in information that was protected, and in the quiet demonstration that service to country doesn't end when the official uniform comes off. Margaret Chen proved that heroes don't always wear uniforms or carry weapons. Sometimes they wear name tags and comfortable shoes, organizing books and answering questions while watching for the dangers that others might miss.